our focus meeting, pillar 3, with our focus on 3.4 today. I'm Olivia Pearson, committee chair, and I would like for everyone to just take a moment again to introduce themselves. I will defer first to my co-chair.
Good morning, Dave Harper, Chesapeake Community College and Caroline County resident.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kirkland Murray with Anne Arundel Workforce Development Corporation, representing the Maryland Workforce Association, which is an association of the 13 workforce development directors from around the state.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Peter Banyas. I'm a former student member of the Howard County Board of Education and a current first year at Duke.
Good morning, Robin Werner, Talbot County Public Schools Career and Technical Education Supervisor.
Mike DiGiacomo, Executive Director of the Governor's Workforce Development Board and CTE Committee.
Okay, we've got some other guests on.
I'm Allie Carter. I'm the program manager for the CTE committee and the Governor's Workforce Development Board.
Welcome.
Hi, my name is Brandon Butler. I'm the executive director for the Maryland Workforce Association, also joining as a guest today.
Okay, great. Thank you all. We have a couple of other folks that are still making their way in. And so while they are getting set up, I just want to give some updates from the last time we met. So since the last time, we were able to submit our committee feedback on 3.1 to 3.3. And today our focus is 3.4, which is providing high quality career counseling and CTE programs. And thank you to everyone who is able to join us to really support a rich dialogue around 3.4. I see that we have another person who has joined us. Would you like to introduce yourself, Dr. Pearl?
Good morning, I'm Christine Pearl. I am the supervisor of career and technical education for Frederick County Public Schools. Thank you for having me today.
Awesome. Welcome, welcome. Okay, I think we can jump right into it. This is, again, the last area for our feedback. And let's see, Dave is pulling up our information.
Thank you. Yeah, so this is the document format currently, something you and I discussed, Olivia. It breaks down our feedback by each element, 3.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, and the sub elements. I found a couple of just typos and spelling errors, which I corrected. The substance doesn't change. So just to say, if you find any additions, suggestions, edits, feel free to share those with me by email or on this call. And I think ultimately it's Wednesday that we're going to submit the final document. They already have 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, today 0.4, just to be said, Olivia, but we can provide updates, and I would just put in red to highlight that something has changed.
Thank you so much. The document looks great, and I appreciate the way it's laid out here as well.
So Olivia, the Maryland Workforce Association met with the Association of CTE instructors the other day. And one of the questions they ask is, how can they submit some recommendations to this committee? What's the best way for them to submit some recommendations for this to this committee?
And so what I would say is everyone is able to submit recommendations up to the 23rd, and there is a link. So I would recommend, similar to what we're doing as a committee, is for them to provide recommendations on the particular areas or as a whole and submit them directly to the AIB using the link.
So not necessarily to this committee, submit them directly to the AIB.
Absolutely. But I think that this would be a perfect forum. I don't know if any of the folks that you mentioned were able to join us today, but if there's something that they want to discuss with this committee, I think this would be a great forum for them to do so.
Okay.
And I would add in, Kirk, if you know that anyone is submitting something, if they mention to please share it not only with the AIB members, but also with Committee 3, we'll forward it to the committee to make sure that it's received by both groups.
Excellent. Excellent.
And if I can add, I was part of that meeting as well. I think at this point, we still have more questions about how to implement than as opposed to comments. So we're still kind of in that fact-finding stage.
I would just add that in terms of information sent to this committee, it can be included if it's sent tomorrow or the next day. It could, or in the future, it could be included in our future meetings and recommendations, whatever they may be. It just won't be factored in to the draft that's going to be finalized on December 1st, because we'll submit, basically we'll consolidate what we have at the end of this meeting, send it around for edits today or tomorrow, and then submit on Wednesday. So if it's to inform the December 1st document, the comprehensive plan finalization, just submit it directly, as Olivia has said.
Yeah, and I think, Dave, you bring up a great point as it relates to our future meetings. And so I think 3.4 is a piece that we are all thinking through and working through. And so I think as we continue to meet throughout the year, I think this is going to be a topic of discussion as to how every LEA is addressing 3.4, because I think it's slightly different, and it's going to be slightly different in every jurisdiction.
And this is Mike, if I could interject, just as a point of reference, Rachel actually did a presentation to the MWA, the local workforce directors, on 3.4 last week to get some clarification and questions answered there. So we want to thank them for that. So there has been some conversation between the AIB and the MWA.
And it's my understanding that we're having another joint meeting between CTE directors and Maryland Workforce in December, and they have asked Rachel to participate in that as well. So I think that will certainly go a long way in our understanding.
Yeah. So just to piggyback on what Dr. Pearl just said and what Mike just said is that we did have a very good meeting with the two Rachels, and thank you very much for doing that. And Mike, thanks very much for setting that up. And one of the things that we discussed is that these are going to be ongoing meetings that we're going to have. So we're going to have another meeting where I think we're going to invite the CTE directors, but then we also talked about having a meeting where we invite the local school system in so that we're all learning and hearing the same thing at the same time to help clear up any misconfusion that we may have, and we can just all learn together, which I think, we would definitely extend an invitation to the committee members, this committee members, if they're available to join that too.
Thank you so much. And I think there's a lot to be said for hearing the same information at the same time so that we can process it collaboratively, so that we're able to really process our pieces and how do we start to collaborate to address 3.4 and really all of these areas as it relates to college and career readiness. I think specifically in 3.4.1a, where it speaks to middle and high school students receiving this career counseling, and it has to be individualized. I think, at least in Prince George's County, I think we're trying to wrap our minds around what does that really mean, and how do we go about addressing the needs, individual needs. And I think we hear that reiterated multiple times throughout the blueprint, as well as in some of our other areas that we've worked through in this committee, how we're able to do this.
So Olivia, just thinking out off the top of the head, you know, as I mentioned, we were talking about having a meeting with all the parties involved, the LEAs, the workforce boards, the community college, and CTE. Would that maybe be something that this committee wants to host that meeting? That'd be one of our meetings that we bring everyone together instead of trying to set up a separate meeting on top of the meetings that we already have?
I think that's a great idea, or as you stated previously, inviting us, the committee, to the meeting. I don't know what the process is as to, you know, if it's already been set up, but absolutely. Again, I think as we collaborate, that's something that would be great if as many folks at a time can hear the same information. I think it goes a long way.
Good. Okay.
Who did you imagine in that meeting, Kirk? I want to make sure I capture what you said.
So it will be the LEAs, the CTE instructors, the workforce board directors, of course, the governor's workforce board, and then this committee, the members of this committee.
And I'd just like to clarify, the CTE folks are the directors within their school system.
Right.
So we don't actually instruct, although we used to.
Okay.
LEA leads, the three elements are the WIBs, the LEAs, and the community colleges. So I think that's what you're just, those are the parties to the MOUs, you know, that are envisioned in this legislation, I think. So
Yes.
I'm with you now. Cool.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea because, I mean, I think that some of us would already be invited to that meeting. I unfortunately was not able to make the last one, but that makes sense to have our whole committee invited so that we're all on the same page.
And I'm just thinking of time's sake and coordination, that if we as a committee set it as one of our meetings and just invite everybody, then it's one less meeting that we have to try to coordinate, since we already know that we need to continue to have our committee meetings.
Right, I agree.
Today doing something a little different and capturing some notes, and thanks to Rachel, she always helps fill them out and make them more accurate. But the recommendations as they come in, where appropriate, I'm going to try to capture them on this document that includes all of our recommendations so far. So feel free to edit or change or adjust, right, what I say or don't say.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Will there be any time at the end to perhaps go back and review some of what was decided from the last meeting? I had just 2 follow-up questions that I don't know that they were covered. And so I just wanted to put that out there and see if there would be time.
I think there potentially could be. We have about 10 minutes built in to just kind of review in the agenda towards the end of the agenda. So I think we could work that in.
And I send this electronically for comment, right? So you're welcome. And that I just have at this point only I have the email addresses of our committee, but I would just need your email address. So everybody who's on this call.
Okay, so I think we can dig right in. I know, again, everyone is still wrapping their minds around how we're going to do this. The great thing is, I think that probably was the intent of the legislation, to have us think differently about what we're currently doing, and provide additional feedback. And so in Prince George's County in 2015, we received a federal grant from the U.S. Department of Labor. And when I read a lot of the pieces here, it reminded me of some of the work that was done with this particular grant. So I thought I would share that information with the committee. We worked with 4 high schools, and in each high school, we worked with one particular CTE area of study. And with that, we entered a partnership with local industry, along with our local community college, our local four-year institution, and our workforce development board, who also contracted with additional supports to provide things like workplace training for our students. At the school sites, we had resume writing. We also had advising for the students for dual enrollment courses with our local community college. We were able to provide internships. Our workforce development board provided also career exploration events, as well as at our internships, they really were fair style. So the students were able to interview with multiple companies at one time and receive multiple offers for the summer. And so that program was extremely successful. And I'm looking at some of the things and the pieces that are listed here. And those were the same types of things that we were doing with that particular grant.
So Libby, I'd like to add on to that, similar in Anne Arundel County, the workforce board has gone into 2 high schools and one evening high school to run a program called Career X, which is similar to some of the things that you were just mentioning. We were focusing on high school seniors who have identified that they're not going to college. And it's a 2-semester program. The first semester is a lot of career exploration, a lot of career readiness, soft skills training. AAWDC, several years ago, in partnership with industry, we created our own soft skills curriculum that we use for this program. And then the second semester, we place them into internships, and the workforce board pays for the internships. And then the school system has vetted the curriculum that we're using. The kids get credit for going through this program. The internships counts as their work experience or their intern or community service or internships towards graduation. So what we've been talking with the school system about as Blueprint rolls out is that we just expand this program, that we have someone in all of the high schools, and then we'll also go down into the middle schools and do some of this. We would kind of tier this. In middle schools, they'll probably be more heavily focused on the career exploration and the job readiness and the soft skills. But as they get older, as they advance in grades, we would try to get more of the hands-on work experience and different things like that. So that's what we've been talking about to kind of meet some of these objectives in this.
So Kirkley, can you restate who's teaching this curriculum?
So our staff, workforce staff, the workforce staff, they've gone through the background check so that they can go into the high schools. Again, one of the questions I think we all have around this, where it says career counseling, what level of career counseling and what are the credentials that those career, that individuals that are doing the counseling need to have. I think that's one of the questions that we have and we need clarification on, but it's been our career coaches that have been going in. We had dedicated career coaches dedicated to this program, and that's what they do. They go into the school and provide this career counseling to these like I said, right now we're just focusing on high school seniors, but we're looking at, dropping that down and focusing, on all high schools, going into all high schools and doing it at an earlier age.
Are those county employees, Kirk?
They are not. So we're AAWDC is we were created by the county. We're an entity of the county, but we sit outside the county. We're a separate 501c3.
And that's something I don't think it sounds unique. I can't think of an analog in the 5 counties that Chesapeake serves. And there are questions as to who, Olivia, to your question, who are the bodies that are providing the counseling? Is it school system counselors? Is it workforce investment board personnel who haven't had that kind of interaction in the past? Is it a third party?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that's one of the questions that we're trying to answer. I mean, not to put words in Rachel Heiss's mouth, but, when we talked to her and we asked why were the local boards included in this, it was because the local boards are the ones that have the most information on what the in-demand jobs are and what those required skills are for those jobs. So for our staff to go in and to do that counseling, it has been very beneficial so far.
I think that was to make sure that businesses had a voice, just as you say, and a strong voice, and to align the instruction. Just the thing to say is that it may differ. The personnel may differ. I mean, you have a structure in place there. It may differ by county and by MOU.
Exactly. So that flexibility is very important to be able to be, to meet the local demand or the local needs of the local area.
Absolutely. And since I guess the blueprint has been released, there's been a lot of chatter, even amongst other states, on how they've been able to address similar items and who's doing this type of training and their credentials. Like some of them are have different qualifications depending on where you go.
I just wanted to jump in real quick. Dave, can you do me a favor and on your recommendation for 341 A, next to LEA leads, can you add CTE so that it's not confused with any other LEA, that it's specifically the CTE directors that would be invited? Thank you. The other thing I wanted to comment on, the timeline for this. So I think that there is some question about, what does this counseling look like, some of the specifics, like who can deliver these services. But then also I'm looking at the timeline and it's all starting FY24. And I guess my question with that is, if you dig down to all these different points, like for example, B, 341B, MSDE shall provide guidance and career counselors with professional development. And then there's other places where CTE committee is conducting evaluation. Well, that's later on. I apologize. So that makes sense, or that would be later in the timeline. But then there's another under E, MST shall provide professional development to guidance and career counselors on Blueprint for Maryland's Future. Okay. My question with that is the logistics, or I guess my comment, not so much a question. We are potentially, we're coming up with our plan with the workforce development boards, and it's going to look different. I think we've already established that it's going to look different across the states. Like to Dave's point, for the Eastern Shore, that's serving 5 counties. But then, like for you, Kirk, you're one large county, so you have your own challenges there as well. So I digress on that. But we could potentially be hiring employers to do hiring someone to do this counseling. And I guess the concern is, shouldn't some of this guidance and professional development be front loaded to this? Like, how are we building a plan of what this counseling looks like if the guidance and the professional development from MSTE is happening at the same time? I guess I'm looking at this as, we want to be able to give, if we choose to hire counselors for secondary schools for this, we want to make sure that we're setting them up for success and giving them a clear job description and what their expectations are. And I just want to make sure that LEAs and workforce development boards, if they are hiring staff to support this goal, that they're able to be transparent on what the expectations would be. I would hate for us to all make these plans and then there be guidance from MSDE and professional development that says something else that they're expected to do. I don't know if that makes sense. It just seems like they're both starting at the same time. And I'm just kind of concerned rather of how that's going to play out when we're potentially hiring new people to do these things. And if the support comes after the fact.
And to piggyback on that, I'm wondering if MSDE is the right person to do the training, in that each individual community has very different needs. And so in our discussions, we've said that this position needs to know about what's available at our workforce development office, what's available at our community college, what's available in our local school systems. And so maybe having MSDE do the training isn't the correct person. Maybe it needs to be a combination of people from the Workforce Development Board, the community college, and the school system. So just throwing that out there.
I agree, Christine.
Apologize for the interjection. So we're doing a couple things right now just to make sure that, because this is our final meeting, we have good feedback. The live document we're sharing is the document we're providing for feedback, but notes are ongoing. So keep an eye on that if you can, because there's language in there that could be lifted and applied to this document, copy pasted, right? So, and you can jump in there and re-edit or just comment on the verbiage there. Just wanted to draw everybody's attention to that to make sure I'm capturing, like Dr. Pearl, what you just said, and Robin.
So if I don't mind, or if you don't mind, I think Robin's point is well taken about essentially building the plane or flying the plane while building it midair. The only I look at 3.4.1b. I look at the operative language being to help eliminate the potential for demonstrating implicit or explicit bias in their work. So I think that may very well, very well be in the bailiwick, if you will, of MSDE rather than a workforce board. Although I do believe that I think the training point is well taken, as well as, if there's anything else that I think talking to the various directors of the local workforce boards, stressing flexibility. That's the one thing that I took away from Rachel's discussion with us is that the one thing that we can bring to the table and bring it very well is the having the finger on the pulse of local employment opportunities. So if there's any flexible or any way that we could recognize that flexibility, I think that's it will produce better results than having that one size fits all.
Yeah, I actually agree with you, Brendan, and I'm thinking about the language that involves MSDE is, to your point, more about the implicit bias and ensuring everyone knows that there are multiple pathways and the training around the pathways, not the specifics about what's going on in each jurisdiction. And I think that this is like our framework, and this doesn't say that this is the only PD that's going to occur. And I think being open to that and realizing that this is what's spelled out in the blueprint. So we need to make sure, of course, that this is occurring. But if LEAs want to hire additional staff, or anyone wants to hire staff, and we're entering into these agreements with a new lens, I think we have to understand that it's ongoing. The same way we're having ongoing meetings, I think the training is going to be ongoing, and it's not just exclusive to one entity. I think it's going to be a collaborative process.
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot of flexibility built into this section, and we've just been kind of highlighting that with our comments, and we previously have said resources would be needed for things like professional development and personnel. We've made that comment at the top. So I'm not sure how much more we'll say here for 3.4.1.
I just wanted to add one thing to reiterate what Dr. Pearl was stating about maybe at some point, I don't know where the most appropriate place would be, but including the voices, so it's not just MSTE, because I do agree that maybe in some of these we might need Workforce Development Board or the CTE committee, or I don't know, maybe this is some sort of subcommittee that could also help advise MSTE. I'm thinking like under E there, for that professional development and guidance to career counselors. I just think that really needs to be a joint effort, and that shouldn't just solely rest on MSTE.
You mean the development of that professional development?
Right. To me, it just makes sense because with all of this, the CTE committee is very involved in 3.4. And as is the workforce development boards have some responsibility. So just like how we're trying to have a meeting to invite all these parties in December for everyone to be there, it kind of makes sense that if this is if this is the guidance for these career counselors, I think it would make sense to have representation. I mean, MSTE could still lead this, but maybe having some sort of representation from the workforce development boards and possibly the CTE committee as well, just to make sure that everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, Robin, I think that makes sense. You know, I hearken it back to when the local workforce boards were implementing the Federal Workforce Act recently, and there were a lot of convenings that we did together, and trainings, learnings that we did, that it pushed those partnerships in a more organic way. So, you know, maybe that's a vehicle, you know, kind of jointly learning. Maybe this is from the CTE committee out of the Governor's Workforce Development Board. Maybe it's not, but it could be something along those lines where we all kind of pull away from our day-to-day work and try to come to, you know, a meeting of the minds.
Any more comments on B or C?
I think we've covered that pretty well.
Okay. Next one's a big one that we've commented on before. 45% of high school students shall earn an industry recognized credential or complete the high school level of a registered apprenticeship. There's a dearth of registered apprenticeship opportunities in rural areas in particular. We've talked about the industry credential and even the value of the completion certificate of a CTE pathway. So Robin, you want to comment on this one?
Yeah, you all got to hear me go on my soapbox about the last meeting. No, I think we could probably just reiterate. I don't even remember where that came up last week, but I don't know how much control really is within the AIB and their plan for this, because I do understand that this is law with this 45%, but if it could just be noted again that I guess the best way to summarize the comments and concerns would be that there is going to be a heavy lift for to meet this 45%, especially in rural areas for apprenticeships. Secondly, my concern is that without including CTE completion in this 45% and only recognizing the industry credential, that it is devaluing the completion of a CTE program. Specifically, when we have some programs that have industry certifications midway through the program, just based off of how they're all designed differently. That I think there's just as much value to a student completing the program. We've had many students who complete programs and might not have been successful in their industry standards, but the skills that they have learned were invaluable, and that they were able to take those still and be successful in those careers. So I think that is a summary of my spiel from last week's meeting. But just if we could note that again, that there's just a concern with being able to, that if it's even attainable, and I'm just concerned of what happens with CTE programs in general.
I gave it a shot, Robin. Feel free to edit.
I did my best to summarize that as quickly as possible so that you don't have to listen to me go on about that again.
No. It's a good point. The community college in the Midshore, we're trying to find apprenticeship placements, and then there are 10 high schools who may be doing the same. And when you're talking about the end result of just many students, a lot of whom will be under 18, we're talking about a lot of small local employers. We're not talking about PG County or Baltimore, and they don't have educators on staff, and they don't want untrained youth to keep an eye on. They don't want to place our students there. So this is a real problem. It's a little easier for the college, but it's still a challenge because the apprenticeship environment in rural areas in Maryland is not as conducive to this legislation as it is in more urban areas.
One other thing that came up in a meeting that I had last week, I'm part of a subcommittee of Easton's Rotary Club that's specifically to like job placement and like workforce development. There's lots of different perspectives from Talbot County that are invited to this. And our school to career counselor and myself, we meet every month with this committee. And we were trying to explain all this because we have a lot of support in Talbot County from our employers of wanting to just dive in and help us. But what I'm concerned about also is hurting our relationships with our employers that are already in apprenticeship. And I know that you might like think why this could hurt this, but I thought this through with some of the employers we already have that align to our program. So this is what I could see as a potential unintended consequence. And I'll give you, if I already give this example, you can stop me. I can't remember who I've discussed this with at this point, but one of our really big employers, or one of our industries that's a big supporter of us in Talbot County, is hospitality. And specifically in the St. Michael's area, we have a very strong relationship with Perry Cabin Inn. They take a lot of our students who finish our culinary arts program. Students in that program can finish that within 2 years. And then they often start it as early as 9th or 10th grade, and then they can be an apprentice. We have a lot of students that go through both programs. So they do CTE, the program, they go through the American Culinary Federation assessment, they then get placed. Perry Cabin is used to having our students who have gone through the whole program, and they frequently reach out to our instructors saying, do you have more students? We could use some more. I'm afraid an unintended consequence will be, because schools are going to continue to try to get the 45%, all they need to have is related instruction to go into apprenticeship. So I'm afraid trying to meet that benchmark of 45%, we already know that we have an employer who supports us and takes multiple students every year, that we're going to start sending students to Perry Cabin who've only taken one culinary course. And now that employer is going to say, whoa, these students don't have as much education. What is happening? They used to come to us after taking 4 courses, and now they've only taken 1 or 2, and now we have to do more of a lift to educate them. And I don't want students being placed in apprenticeships like that when our employers, I don't want to hurt relationships with our employers, I guess, because technically with apprenticeship, you only have to have your related instruction, which is fine in many cases. But I'm concerned about the programs that we already have that are connected to CTE programs where there's an assumption that students finish the majority, if not all of the program, and then go to apprenticeship. Just because they're going to have some more flexibility. And I don't want to see counselors feeling pressured to have more students in apprenticeship where they direct students to leaving a CTE program to jump into apprenticeship, if that makes sense. Like, to me, in Talbot County, apprenticeship should be for two different pathways for students. One, to educate them in a program that we do not currently have. Because we are small, we can only have so many programs and maintain them financially. So, for example, HVAC. We don't have an HVAC, but if you drive around Talbot County, there are employers who have signs up for HVAC that they are willing to hire and educate people to be techs for them. That is an appropriate apprenticeship program for us, because we would find some sort of related instruction of one course, they go into apprenticeship, and now they're getting educated in an area that we're not able to support with our own programs. The other would be to have something that would be at the completion of a CTE program. So like I said, my culinary arts program is a very successful program. They then go into one of the many restaurants or like such as Perry Cabin Inn to then finish employment. Like, it would be a bookend to that, if that makes sense. I don't want it to replace completing CTE programs, because then students lose a key piece of education, but then on top of that, it could hurt our relationship with employers. So that was a really long way of explaining that, but I'm just looking down the road. I'm afraid that that's going to be an unintended consequence of
this. So if I can jump in from the workforce side of things, there's some nomenclature on our side of the fence that I think needs to be made aware of, at least. So a registered apprenticeship is a defined term by law. It's by the U.S. Department of Labor standards, and is separate from 2 other flavors of apprenticeship, if you will, that we see in Maryland. So Maryland has the apprenticeship, or the AMP program, Apprenticeship Maryland, that is in a majority, I believe, of the school districts now. There's also a pre-apprenticeship that is an on-ramp onto a registered apprenticeship program. The thing is that the Apprenticeship Maryland program is not a registered apprenticeship by DOL standards. And where a registered apprenticeship are both the typical sides of things, like like was mentioned, HVAC, or carpentry, or the unions types of trades. There's also that program was created and then registered with the state Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Council. That's different than the path that AMP programs take. As Christine, as Dr. Pearl knows very well, the AMP program is also a creature of statute, and is something that the program isn't registered per se. What is approved is the employer is approved as an eligible employer for the program. So when the statute, or when we're saying apprenticeship programs, there's some really important delineations between AMP, a pre-apprenticeship program, and a registered apprenticeship program, that from our side or from the workforce side of the fence, I think really needs to be, we need to be very careful about.
Excellent point. Thank you.
So can I ask a clarifying question about that, Brandon? So I'm more familiar with AMP. And I do think this is going to be confusing. So is this 45% then, is that, are you saying that that's not necessarily all of the AMP programs?
So that I think is something that we need to clarify.
Okay.
And or at least ask for clarification, because if the term is high school level of a registered apprenticeship, then a registered apprenticeship is a defined term in federal law, and so that's where there are certain requirements of certain hours of related instruction and certain hours of on-the-job training. Those are the things that that separate a registered apprenticeship from the AMP program.
Can I ask a
That's a good
question
point.
as well, Brandon? I remember recently reading the federal definition, and it did not require the 450 hours. It provided a little more flexibility, but I don't remember exactly what it states. Can you enlighten us?
So generally, Christine, I have not seen that. I've not seen maybe what you read, and maybe that's something that I can go back and you and I can put our heads together on. But generally speaking, it is the 450 hours of related instruction. I know that there was some, I don't want to sound political. There was some maybe watering down of requirements under a previous federal administration that has since been repealed by USDOL. But it has, I think that's the problem here, is that the AMP program, and full disclosure, that's where I first met Christine several years ago in developing the AMP program, where there are a lot of the same flavors. There's industry led, there's a job, job day one, there's a structured mentorship that have the same elements as a registered apprenticeship. It's just not a registered apprenticeship by federal law. But but send me what you got, Christine. I'll be glad to take a look at it and report back.
I think part of what we're saying, and by the way, for the clarification piece, make sure that's worded properly and tell me what to insert. But down here, LEA, it's the darker gray 3.4.4. LEAs offer a robust set of CTE programs that allow students to earn an industry recognized credential or a post-secondary certificate. That's it. In HVAC, for example, Chesapeake could provide the HVAC training that you referenced. In some places, that complementary relationship is happening, I've heard. Or complete the high school level of a registered apprenticeship program, sort of acknowledging that there are different forms of apprenticeship, youth apprenticeship, and so on. That's been approved by the Division of Workforce Development. So just trying to work in those multiple options that could count toward the 45%. Just take a look at the wording there and make sure it's what we want to say.
So the AMP program and Maryland Youth Apprenticeship are one and the same generally, but you could say AMP program, pre-apprenticeship, or registered apprenticeship.
Yep. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
So some of the conversations that we've been having here at the Workforce Board in Anne Arundel County around this goal, to take in consideration what Robin's saying about CTE program, is that there are kids who do not go into CTE or can, I believe in Anne Arundel County, you have to decide if you want to go to a CTE program by the 10th grade. So there are kids who may have not had that opportunity to go into it. We were looking at how do we use youth apprenticeships to cover the kids who did not go into a CTE program, because you're right, you don't want to kind of water down the CTE program just to meet that requirement.
And I think that is an example of like what the intention was there,
Mhm.
because a lot of districts do have a similar, like you have, especially for the schools that are not comprehensive CTE schools, and we're going to a career and tech center, there's usually you have a timeline where you have to make that decision. So that probably was a lot of that intention of finding another way to capture students into CTE if they had not made that jump in 10th grade to go to one of those schools. And I think this is an example of where those that have comprehensive CTE schools may have more of an unintended consequence than those that are career and tech centers, because you're right, those students who make a decision at the end of 10th grade, they're going to go through that pathway, and then, like you said, in Anne Arundel could then focus on their 11th and 12th graders who did not go into the career tech centers and focus on them for the 45%. So I think it's an example of how things could play out differently depending on where we're at and how we schedule students and just the models that we have.
Are we ready for 3, 4, 3?
I think so.
Actually, if I could add one last thing to that previous point on the 45%. I imagine that there's a lot of different industry certifications, and we wouldn't want to restrict ourselves to any specific, small number. But the logical consequence of that, of providing that, would be there would be some that would be much easier to get. Was just looking up a couple of different ones, some of them being like first aid certification, things like, okay. So I just want to make sure that there isn't going to be some solution where schools, in the attempt to reach that 45% number, do something that kids can pick up within like a week.
So,
No, Peter, because what happens right now is in our CTE programs, we have for each of our programs, so most of us use state programs, and we do have the option of having our own local programs, but then they also have to get approved by the state. We have a list of options for industry certifications. So we can't just choose something like that and say, oh, okay, that's our industry. We technically go over first aid in this program. We have to use one that is outlined by the state.
I see. Perfect. Thank you.
But you bring up a good point, that maybe that's something that, and I think this will probably play out more in the CTE committee, that maybe we do need to expand on those options that are provided. Maybe, we work from a model right now where a lot of these programs only have one industry certification, and maybe in some of them there could be multiple, that they could earn industry credentials along the way. So I think that's probably something that will be reviewed down the road, but maybe that's something we can encourage, that having multiple opportunities for industry certifications.
Yeah, I think it brings up, the interesting trade-off for counties like Howard County, where 80% of kids are going to college and don't necessarily need a certification. It might make sense if we're if this is our goal, to make an option that might be useful, but not like take up too much of their class time, like getting CPR certification, even if that doesn't go all the way to what is intended by real industry certification, I think it could apply to a broader number of people.
And I
Mhm.
think, Peter,
Go ahead.
you bring up a great point as it relates to, let's say, a student who wants to go to a four-year institution, right?
Mhm.
And this really, from my perspective, and I'm thinking it's where our state is going, is doing both.
Yeah.
And so I was a student who was a CTE student, and I went to a highly selective four-year institution. And with that, I worked. So I was able to work while I was going through school. I worked part-time, and I was working in a field that provided job skills that enhanced my ability to gain employment once I graduated from college. So even though, you're thinking, oh, we have students who are going to a four-year, at the end of the day, they are still going to be seeking employment. And so the earlier they're able to gain a lot of the skills, the better they're going to be in the long run.
That's very true.
Yeah, a perfect example of that is the Academy of Health Professions pathways, like our CNA pathways. So those students can go straight, they can leave being 17, 18 years old and have a CNA license. And the hope is that if they want to continue and go to a 2 or 4 year college, whether that's to be a registered nurse or go into another field in healthcare, that those students can actually have a leg up on everyone else, that they have their CNA already, so that they are more prepared for clinicals and working with patients going into nursing school, if they so choose to go that route. We also have articulation agreements with community colleges, but they can, like Olivia said, they can work. So that's a perfect example of they can work and get more hours and be paid working in their field, and then continue their education if they want to go into a 4-year college. So we're trying to remove this idea that it's either CTE or college. In some cases, some of our fields do, some of the programs are going to lend itself directly to careers. But in some, there's options. You could leave that program and go straight to work. You could go to a 2-year trade school. You could go to college, or do any sort of combination. So yeah, I think we just want to make sure that I don't want to see with any of these pathways that students do not see the opportunity for doing all of those things if they so choose.
Absolutely. And I'm looking at like 3.4.4, what is it, C and D, thinking about what would that look like? And as we're talking about those stackable credentials, and so you may start with one particular credential and it can build, and there's a lot of ways to do that. Robin gave a great example of nursing. I've known folks also use those same health professions, such as dental assisting, dental hygiene, and they, let's say, will go on to become dentists or physician's assistants to doctors. I mean, there's so many different layers and the abilities to not just go to 2-year, 4-year, but also graduate school, using this as a basis.
I'm thinking about this, and maybe this is, we talked about the pathways, and we wrote as a recommendation last week about having the flexibility of, allowing students to do some of both if they want to when it comes to AP, dual enrollment, CTE. It would be nice if we could go through all the different industry credentials that are possibly out there that would be beneficial to students, no matter what direction that they go. You gave the example of CPR training. I'm thinking of some others that could be beneficial, like having an Adobe certification, being Google certified, right? We have some teachers that take coursework in that and being, having their credentials for Google.
OSHA
I'm
10.
just thinking of things. Yeah, OSHA, exactly. If there could be a list of credentials that we could help support students, and they might not have to do an entire program, but maybe doing some combination of those. I don't know, that could also benefit students where they're getting a little bit of both, and then also having the opportunity for an industry certification, but it's not just doing so in a way of checking off a box so that we're getting that 45. It's actually providing an opportunity. I mean, say that there was a student who wanted to go into pre-med and they didn't have the opportunity to do the biomed or CNA program, but our CNA students and our instructor there do CPA certification. Our CNA instructor is a trainer, having opportunities for them to still be utilizing our equipment and being trained and going through that coursework. Like, if we have that there, are there ways that we can leverage that and provide more opportunities? Because I think that that's the intention there of getting appropriate industry certifications to students and giving them access to that so that they can have as many of those at their fingertips before they leave high school.
Robin, I like the idea of a combination, because my concern is if we make them industry certifications that can be very quickly checked off, that's
Yeah.
exactly what folks will do. So we want to make sure that they're
Right.
still valuable. So I think you're onto something with maybe the combination of options.
And I almost feel like that's something that you have to look at all of our programs, right? And like look at, you take all the programs that we have and we look at, and I know that the CTE committee is going to do this and they're going to review what we have, and this is going to take time. And that nothing's going to change, overnight with this. But maybe we need to start looking at all the programs that we have and start identifying where are some industry certifications that are available, but it might not be necessary for a student to complete the entire program to do that specific industry certification. And then you build a pathway that requires them to do a portion of it. So thinking along the lines of like CPR, CPR is a rather quick certification, right? So we don't want students to not do anything in our program and then just do that. And then, they're a part of that 45%. I think it would be a combination of like you take the Foundations of Medicine course, get CPR trained, and then if you so choose, you can tack that on to either going dual enrollment or AP. Like having almost like a menu of choosing some of these that give students an opportunity to do both. Thinking about that for interactive media, they take in Talbot County, there's a variety of Adobe assessments they could take, and they could be very specialized. Some of them are more in Photoshop, film, whatnot. If it's something that could support a college-bound student who's in AP or whatnot, they could have the skills from that Adobe certification that they could apply to their programs. If they're making presentations or if they're making videos for projects, like I think that's what we want, is for students to be able to apply skills to whatever program or pathway that they so choose. But it's almost like you have to look through everything that we have and put together like what makes sense, so that we don't just allow students to just take certifications and then without the education behind it, so that it's completely eliminating the need for doing the program. But I think that there are some very specific programs where if students wanted to do a portion of it, it could be to their benefit to support them in the dual enrollment or AP pathway.
And I really like that. And also taking into account using the dual enrollment pathway to complete the certification. And I don't know if that was also implied with part of what you were saying, but there may be programs that we don't necessarily house as a district, but the local community college may be able to offer, the non-credit areas that also have a credentialing with them. And so is there a way to not just do a menu of what's offered with the LEAs, but how does that pair with what is offered at the community colleges, and how can our students maximize all the opportunities? Because our district also has a time frame by which you have to sign up for a particular CTE program. But let's say you weren't interested in doing that because you would have to go to a different school and you wanted to stay in your school. But how could we maximize what our local community college offers to also meet that 45%?
I know we have, I believe it's 37 different dual enrollment options within our CTE programs of study. The way I interpreted this, they would not count. And so I think it would be very beneficial for those students who do see CTE as still vocational education to have that understanding that these are those pathways that provide opportunities for on-off ramps. And they are for students who intend to go into college as well.
Absolutely. And so my interpretation of the blueprint is that those may start to count. So we may have an opportunity to really explore this more.
I guess I was thinking about what you had said also, Olivia, with some of the CTE programs that may be at the community college that they might host, and that could really be beneficial, I know, for the Eastern Shore. But because I'm thinking of a program such as HVAC, right? We don't have that, Chesapeake College does. I think where things might get a little interesting though is funding here, because you know, we rely on Perkins 5 CTE Reserve Fund, and that's looking at our data, looking at how many students we have enrolled, how successful they are with their industry certifications and technical assessments. So that's where I think things are going to get a little gray, because we're going to be looking at like whose students are they, how does that work for funding? Because then Chesapeake College, for example, may be getting more students to do a program like HVAC. Does that fall under the dual enrollment category, where then we're paying, I would assume we'd be paying for their enrollment in those areas. I'm assuming that there are more fees that are connected to doing some of those programs, as there's equipment and things like that. So would a student doing something like that technically, what program are they under? Are they in dual enrollment? Are they both? Are they CTE? And then does that count towards our 45% of CTE if they're technically doing it through Chesapeake College? I would assume it is, because we're providing access for students to have an industry certification. It's just the funding part of that could get complicated, because that's going to be expensive. We're going to have more students who do that, and you know, who applies for that funding then when it comes to Perkins. And I know that see, this is where like Perkins is federal. So how is the blueprint going to align with Perkins 5? Because that's what we know, and that's the world we live in CTE, for being able to go through our data and fund our programs and the needs. So I'm just curious. I don't think that's anything this group can necessarily answer right now, but I think it just could be noted that there's going to be the need to look at how that's going to play out with Perkins 5.
Absolutely. And I think some of the basis is already here. When you look at 3.4.4N, it speaks to MSBE requesting a waiver from the U.S. Department of Education to transfer responsibility for administering the Carl Perkins CTE Act to the CTE committee. And so I'm wondering if that kind of is providing that basis for us to start thinking outside of the box. And so if this is for us to just rethink how, you know, we are looking at education in our state, I think we've got to do that, because to your point, we're saying that, you know what, we've got students in this dual enrollment program, we've got students who are in our CTE programs. And if we want to allow students the flexibility to participate in both, having streamlined funding is important. And a lot of times, let's say at some of these levels, you know, it's like, you know what, it's covered, you know, we have enough to cover it. But in your LEA, that becomes, I think, where some of these things are worked out also.
So if I'm understanding this correctly, the CTE committee would then oversee Perkins 5. And I'm assuming then, and I believe that this was discussed at a prior meeting way back when, and this was brought up. So all of our applications and data and everything would then go to the CTE committee rather than MSDE for review. But I think there's still going to have to be alignment there, because if I'm understanding that they're just asking for a waiver of who's administering it, we can't change what's required in Perkins 5. So what the other thing that I'm thinking about as I talk right now is the CTE committee, if there's administering it and like looking over our applications and everything like that, but then there's also providing the support along the way that LEAs are going to need. Because right now, and I can speak as being a newer CTE supervisor, I had one-on-one support with a person from MSCE and CTE. They are divided by region. So we have an Eastern Shore person. There's someone who looks at like Baltimore schools. There are regions of how CTE is divided in MSDE. And we have our regional associate that helps us with all of our Perkins and reserve funding questions, helps go through our data with us, sets individual meetings with us, but then also helps us with some of our other responsibilities in for CTE that are not necessarily always related to Perkins. So I'm wondering how that transfer is going to happen while also supporting the LEAs, right? Because this is going to be a heavy lift for the CTE committee to be able to support all the LEAs in that process, right? Because that is what we are used to from LEAs, of having direct support. It's not just telling us our allocations and then writing our grant and then getting it approved. There is a step-by-step process. There are meetings, there's one-on-one support and guidance. So I would just like that to be noted there, that, you know, that will hopefully still continue, because I think it's going to be necessary.
And I just wanted to also know if that has already taken place, like, did it get approved? Because this just speaks to requesting a waiver. And so I think that's very important to also know, where are we in that process? And are we proceeding as if it has been approved? I think all of that's important, because I need to look again to see when this is supposed to be taking effect, because it's next year, I believe. Let me look again.
Yeah, I was
was
wondering too where that was at in the
I was
process.
under-
This year,
sorry.
that's this year. I guess they're requesting the waiver.
Yeah, that's what I was under the impression, although I believe MSDE has previously reached out when the CTE folks were under Tiara Booker Dwyer, so I'm not sure what she found. I am a little concerned in the question there for 3.4.4N, because we do receive a limited amount of Perkins funding. And yes, and so I would not want the legislation to think that, oh, well, they have CTE, so now we don't have to support additional funding for dual enrollment or career counseling. Because the funding that we do receive is what we use to upgrade our current programs. And certainly when we can add new ones, but it's not significant enough to say, okay, instead we're going to fund this. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think different LEAs use it for different things, but at the end of the day, it's just to keep what we have afloat, whether that's paying for technical assessments or replacing equipment or whatnot. It's not enough to add.
Same for us. I've updated it accordingly. And for 3.4.4J and N, just take a look there because there's something here as we're talking about the CTE committee leading in Perkins administration and the CTE committee in allocating roles and responsibilities to state agencies for credentialing students. So I'm not sure what our recommendations will be on this point, but I mean, you just described something really creative, right? For flexibility and genuine, like business-focused credentialing for CTE students. But it's going to be the CTE committee allocating roles and responsibilities to state agencies. So there's some kind of collaboration that's implied, and I don't know exactly how to word it, but take a look and tell me what you think.
Is that the skills committee that they are supposed to appoint?
Christine, I think it would be. I would assume it would be the skills committee. But Dave, you're right. I think that there is implied collaboration. Maybe this is our opportunity to not assume that it's implied and to just make sure that we provide, a note there that, that there is collaboration across the board between the committee and the subcommittees and MSCE.
I also, as we're talking about this, I'm thinking about 3.4.4H, where it talks about the CTE committee sets content qualification and recruitment standards for CTE instructors. And I absolutely am thinking about how that collaboration would happen with the LEAs as well. And I know one of the pillars is really focused on teachers and the career ladder and all of those pieces. And so I see where there's overlap. We talked about it last week too, with the overlap with instructors and how these pathways are going to be taught.
So can we add some questions there for clarification? I think one is, okay, I'm a little bit confused on what that phrase means, recruitment standards. They're setting, I understand content qualification and recruitment standards for CTE instructors. I'm not sure what exactly that would look like. The content qualification, so I'm assuming the CTE committee can set the qualifications that they see that deem an instructor qualified for that program. So my other question with this is, how are we handling that for, say we have some instructors who are not what they would consider qualified? I'm assuming they'd be grandfathered into that, or is there going to be professional development that they must do to get there? There's going to be a transition here, I think, in some programs. Some not so much. Some of them are, I don't think that there can be some changing. We have some state agencies that are involved, like the Maryland Board of Nursing and cosmetology and those types, where I don't think that those are going to change, right? But because there's going to have to be a relationship with those state agencies. But just how are we handling any shifts with qualifications? And while we're talking about recruitment, and I don't know if if this is really anything that AIB or Blueprint can handle or can manage or take care of with this. But a real problem is being able to recruit qualified instructors in CTE and be able to provide a salary that is even remotely competitive with their industry. I mean, we are essentially asking the best of the best to leave their industry so that they can teach our children, right? We don't want someone who's mediocre in their field teaching our children. Well, if we're asking them to leave an industry that is paying them substantially more, most of them are not going to take that jump into teaching because it's usually very foreign to them from the industry that they're in. The only exception I have seen with that and some of the instructors I've been hiring recently is in the medical field, because there's often some level of education that takes place. I'm finding with nurses to hire for our CNA program, a lot of them have had some experience along the way, so they're not completely opposed to instruction. But my point being, like, is there ever going to be funding to help recruit CTE instructors? Because we are finding a very limited group of people, and it's primarily instructors who are retiring from their industry to then go into teaching. For example, auto tech, right? We were very limited on anyone who was interested in leaving that industry to teach. And, you know, we luckily did find a very qualified instructor. He had retired from his previous job. So that is common in a lot of our industries. And the concern with that is then turnover. And it's not turnover because they're not necessarily happy, but they're doing this as, you know, a new career after they have retired from that industry. So, you know, what can the state do to help leverage that so that going into these fields to teach is appealing to someone and I know that we can't offer them, you know, a huge salary increase, but is there a possibility of some funding at some point that could be some sort of signing bonuses or something to help recruit? Because it's going to continuously be a problem in Maryland to help support students and have quality educators if we can't even come close to salaries that they get in their industry.
Absolutely. I'm wondering if this is a place where maybe the state could add the supplement. And so the person is an employee of the LEA, but they have this state supplement via the Blueprint to provide this instruction that makes their salary comparable to what they would make. And so I think that would potentially be a recommendation, at least from my perspective, a recommendation for this particular area. I also want to just reiterate that I think that this should be somehow in collaboration with the LEA. Unless the state is going to hire these people and deploy them to the school system, I feel like this has got to be an area that is collaborative between the CTE committee and LEAs as to how these instructors are going to be hired. And of course, the qualifications can be set by the CTE committee, but how does that compare to what we're doing as an LEA to hire teachers as a whole?
So here's an off the wall like idea, but it's grounded in something I have experience in. So we have an NJRTC program. So our instructors, similar to what you said, Olivia, they are paid, their salary is covered half by the LEA, half by the Navy. There's a Navy training program. So the Navy, in you know, you mentioned about like deploying teachers, but that might not be a bad idea, because the way that it works is whatever branch it is, and I have only experience with the Navy, they train their instructors through their program. They put them through a training, and then there's a database So when we are looking to hire a new instructor, which we did a few years ago, we're able to go through a database, look at who has been trained, and then those instructors, they put like out a resume that says where they're interested in relocating to. So the database is, from all over the country. And then the LEA has the ability from there to contact those instructors who are willing to move to Maryland. Or, I mean, is that something to look into on a smaller basis in Maryland as something that the CTE committee could help over, look over and see, like, what counties would they be willing to work in, and have it divided by the program area so that there could be more support? Because people are not going to Talbot County Public Schools website to look for a job for an industry like that. It's not in their thought process to go to a school. We use social media and whatnot, but I found that the majority of the instructors that I'm finding that should be in CTE and making the jump to being a teacher, I have found them through connections, through word of mouth, through knowing other people in those fields. It's very organic in how we're finding those instructors. They're not applying for teaching positions that way. So by having some sort of support by, I don't know, a CTE committee, MSCE combination, a subcommittee of the CTE for recruitment, I just think there's going to have to be some support with outreach there to help us even find people, let alone, there's two pieces of it. Support with finding people, but then also the money aspect of it. I mean, for me to find an auto tech instructor, I went through community colleges, the Maryland Auto Dealers Association, a local classic motor museum. I mean, I went through all these different channels, and it took me a year to do that. And that's just one example. So if this committee had people who were in all these different fields that could help with that outreach, I mean, I know that sounds kind of crazy, but, maybe looking at some sort of model like that, because I know I'm not going to be the only county that, we have some teachers that are going to retire in the next few years. And the thought of being able to replace some of these really specific in demand areas is truly frightening to me to be able to find someone. And at the end of the day, it's different. I know we have a teacher shortage everywhere in this country, but there is a huge difference in having, and this is no disrespect to teachers in any other content, and I can say this because I was a science teacher first. You can put a sub into some of these other core courses until you find someone, right? We could put substitutes. We don't always put substitutes in our CTE courses when we're short a teacher. Our carpentry program, when that teacher is out, those classes are not even in the shop because it's too dangerous. Those students are totally removed, and they're put in a media center where somebody looks over their class. They don't even have access to that curriculum when their instructor's not there. So, and that's not to take anything away from any other content areas, but at least students have access. So when you have a shortage of CTE teachers in particular, that could be very damaging to all these different pathways that we're trying to build up, and having access to all the things that are in Blueprint. So I think that there's going to have to be some sort of support somewhere around the line with recruitment of teachers.
I think I've captured both points, but feel free to take a look. And just to note that, community colleges have all the same pressures on hiring industry professionals and trying to attract them to education, as opposed to where they can often make more money. But one thing we could do, shameless plug alert, but one thing we can do where it makes sense is work together to increase capacity. There may be, although funding is a question, but there may be opportunities for some of our faculty or some of our programs to supplement instruction where it makes sense.
And so we've got some time still, and I don't know if we wanted to talk about 3.4.4i. Since we're here, that talks about the CTE committee will determine which program shall be approved for credit towards high school graduation requirements.
I mean, that's wrapped up in our comments on flexibility, on
Yeah.
hybrid pathways, on collaboration. I mean, for us, for rural communities in particular, we often have to get creative and think about hybrid models or partnerships in order to get things done, like the 45% mark.
Yeah, I think that there was concern about this a few months ago, that this could like turn some of our programs upside down and, you know, put a pause on some things. But I think Mike cleared that up in one of our meetings a while back, that nothing's going to change overnight and it would be a transitional process.
The concern that I have is that I believe somewhere in the legislation it says by next year. And at this point in the game, it's highly unlikely that the CTE committee will have a full list of programs. So I would like us to be able to identify the timeline. And is that in fact a requirement for next school year? Because we're already, at least in my school system, we've already done our course guide for next year. And it's very difficult to just jump in and change 34 CTE program of studies. So timeline would be definitely appreciated.
And I, to your point, I see that with multiple areas. With this, I think we've made comments on timeline previously in some of the other areas as well. But I think that is very important to take a look at the timeline and what does that look like?
You know, and I'm thinking even once they do identify programs that we would need a phase-in period, because I would hate to have students who are in the midst of a CTE program of study to then not be able to finish and have to switch gears midstream. That would not be of benefit to the students.
Yeah, I think you're right. It'll have to be. So Dave, if you can just add that comment, because again, this could be really complicated, especially, I mean, in Talbot, we have agreements with other counties that their students come to us, ours go to them for programs we don't have. So, you know, if we're all working together and someone's adjusting, we just have to make sure that there's time to address all these changes.
Yes, and I see this year is where some of these are in effect beginning this year and going into next year with the implementation pieces. And so we're in November, so I'm hoping that as the CTE committee is actively engaged, how that information is transmitted, is it going directly to MSTE? How does that happen so that the LEAs can make adjustments as appropriate? I think that's also important.
I think I've captured it. If you want me to add anything, holler. We have not commented on 3.3. Maybe we don't need to. Is there anything more here that we want to talk about, KL or M and O?
I don't think so. And thank you for bringing us back, because we did not talk about 3.4.3 with the expert review teams.
This is why we want to have occasional contact with the CTE committee. Because we'll keep
Yeah.
meeting at least quarterly, right? I think we started heavy to try to get through this feedback, but then as they determine some of these things, we wish for an audience to communicate back and forth, because we've got our connection points with CTE, with our affinity groups.
Absolutely. And I go back to the how is all the information being shared. And so I think that in our future meetings, I think it was Kirkland brought up a great point as it relates to having some of the meetings being collaborative, so that, you know, we all understand what's happening.
Mike DiGiacomo, when does the CTE committee meet next?
So we are planning a meeting for mid-December to start working through the plan that's due March 31st. So our next, we're in have a hold on their calendars, just checking, but it's going to be mid-December.
Thank you.
I mean, I think we've pitched our efforts at feedback towards a smooth and successful rollout as much as possible. And if the AIB subcommittee, CTE, and Pillar 3 and otherwise kind of lock arms a little bit and communicate well with each other, hopefully that makes a smoother rollout more possible for all these different initiatives.
I would just add one broad swipe of the conversation today is that the CTE committee is going to be collaborative in nature, right? There's many things that are on here that said that's the CTE's responsibility. It's the CTE's in my mind, the CTE's responsibility to build the framework, to build the transitions, to build the alignments, but it's all going to be done collaboratively with the folks like yourselves, both from an education perspective, the employers, the local workforce boards, which is why we have been trying to kind of stay in touch with folks over the last, 6 to 12 months. So I don't see any of that changing, and probably there will be more. The question, the only question is going to be in what format do we all kind of get together? But it will be done in a collaborative method, just the same as we've been doing, the AIB's been doing. The CTE committee will be acting the same way.
And I think no one doubts that. And part of our feedback is just trying to make sure we make recommendations as to who can be at the table, to be useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think our purpose was to all go through each of these areas line by line from we each have our own unique lens here. And I think that, you know, we've done pretty well of serving that purpose. So anytime, I mean, because we've gone through here and gone so in depth over the last few weeks, anytime, and I'm speaking on, I think, behalf of the whole our committee here, but I think we'd be happy anytime, Mike, that we can collaborate with the CTE committee. You know, I would certainly be happy to, so that there's that smooth transition and maybe even like some of the historical knowledge that some of us have of things that happened in the past that maybe worked or didn't work, or, you know, just some of the ideas that have been generated here could, you know, obviously maybe be useful. So anytime that we can work together, that'd be great.
And just a crazy thought, you know, one of the other common themes, like collaboration is one of the themes to make an efficient rollout. Another one is funding for dual enrollment, because some of this anticipates expanded dual enrollment, either for remediation, for college level support, or for CTE work where it makes sense. And the crazy thought is, I wonder if Maryland Promise could ever be leveraged, because it was vastly underspent and it was aimed squarely at full-timers. But, you know, 65 to 70% of community college students are actually part-timers. And about a quarter of most community college students in the state of Maryland are dual enrolled. And there may be some opportunities there to leverage some funds that are on the table.
It's interesting that you bring that up, Dave, because when we were charging students, I'm saying we, in our partnership with the local community college, and students were paying for fees, that was one of the questions that were asked of our dual enrollment students. I thought the Promise Scholarship would cover this. So why is it that dual enrollment students at one point were paying fees, but yet once they graduate, then the community college experience was free?
Yeah, I mean, and it's because of the good intention that full-time students complete faster. It's just not really the typical reality of a community college student who's a community college student because she has a job, you know, or a full-time family, or is in high school still, you know, junior, senior, finishing up. So there's an opportunity there, perhaps.
I like that thought. We've got 15 minutes left in the meeting, and I know Christine asked to have some discussion about some previous points, and so I'm gonna ask her to discuss some areas that she wanted to bring forth.
So actually, both of my areas have been addressed. One was Robin's recommendation previously that we just rediscussed the inclusion of a completion of a program of study, and that we covered. And then the other one was related to a conversation that we had last time about 3.3.2, where we did decide to recommend changing the wording under the guidance portion to perhaps eliminate the references, there we go, that a student did need to, that a student could begin their CTE program of study as early as 9th grade. However, under the other side, which is the actual task, we still have not addressed that. So I'm not sure if we could take a look at that, because it still does say except under limited, or shall be available only to students who have met CCR standards.
I can project that for you if you just tell me. You have to direct me where to go.
So would we be under 3.3.2 A, would we be able to remove only to students? On the first, I'm sorry, in the first sentence, or is that the legislation piece? The first sentence of column B, yes.
column B. Are you talking
I'm
about
sorry,
here?
D. I'm sorry, D.
Well, we can't, anything over here, we can't edit,
Got you. Okay,
right?
then
But
that was my clarification.
but over
Correct.
here, we can make recommendations in column E. So our best shot at it's in E. Yeah,
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
sure.
Then I'm good.
I wanted to bring up, as we're just talking about all of Pillar 3, it was interesting that the LSAT was removed as a requirement for students to attend law school. And so I know that came across this weekend, and it speaks to our dialogue with this committee as it relates to an assessment being a gatekeeper for students to participate in these other pathways. And when I saw that, it was so refreshing for me to see that this isn't just happening while students are in high school. This is happening as they're transitioning to higher ed with the optional with ACT and SAT, but also professional school with the LSAT. And so I was really excited when I saw that announcement.
Yeah, we've really found that the single high stakes assessments do a poor job by and large. When we leverage those, because we're open door institutions, more students fail them and would get kind of looped into developmental or non-credit courses. But if we just take a look at how they performed in certain classes, that's an arc of a semester or a year. It gives a much, if they have a C or better, for example, or a B or better in algebra, whatever, it just gives a better picture of the student's ability to perform. And so having multiple measures for us has been helpful for our students because it helps them accelerate.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I know for this document, I'll PDF it and then share it and send a Word document too, or Excel document too, if anyone wants to sort of like tweak it and track changes or in red. But this is basically what we would send to update what we've already provided. And we'll send it by Wednesday. Gives us about a day.
That sounds good to me. Thank you. I think that for such a short time frame, this committee has done a great job with trying to discuss every aspect of our pillar and provide feedback, and not just the feedback, but actual recommendations as to how we can make this happen moving forward. And so that has been, again, great to see and great for the collaboration. I think our next meeting was initially scheduled for next week, but with this due date of submitting our recommendations by the 23rd, we're going to cancel that meeting as we discussed during our last meeting. But our future meetings, I would like for us to have time to work with the CTE committee, this joint meeting that we've been talking about. And so I think we need to have time to schedule that so that everyone can be part of that meeting.
Yeah, and it's exciting to think about us being able to work together with the other, AIB subcommittees, because I think we've been trying to keep with the spirit of the legislation and make it as successful as possible, and that'll only help.
Absolutely. So we have 8 minutes left in this meeting. If anyone wants to bring forward any other ideas or any other feedback before we close.
I just wanted to thank you all for being able to be flexible and pull together quickly and have turned into what was once every 2 weeks to every week meetings, and then making our meetings longer so that we could get through all of this, because I think it's what we did was really important. to give some feedback, and so that this can all be rolled out in a way that'll be most beneficial to our students. And I wanted to thank Rachel and Graham for dealing with our last minute meetings and making sure that we got online and got our links. So I appreciate, everyone kind of coming together. And when we realized how big Pillar 3 was to get through it, it was just great working with everyone. So thank you, guys.
Thank you all. You've been a fabulous committee to work with. We've enjoyed it, and we will make sure that all of the recommendations are shared with the members as well as posted publicly.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. It's so clear how hard you're thinking about this, and it's so appreciated. The staff have already been looking through what you've already submitted, and the members received it as well. So I know they're going to appreciate it. Thank you guys.
And thank you, Christine and Brandon, for joining us. I know that it was also kind of late notice of when we were meeting. So thank you for joining us to provide your perspectives as well, as they were much needed and appreciated.
Thank you. It was a great honor to participate. Thank you.
Same here. Thanks.
Made a difference, no doubt. Many hands and light work and all that. So thanks everybody for your patience.
Absolutely. So with that, we will give you back 6 minutes in your day to do other tasks, and we will conclude this meeting.